Welcome to the Emblazers show, where B2B leaders are igniting revenue. I'm Abby Kerr, here with
Tim Riesterer. Look at us. I think it's just us today, right?
Yes, Tim. This is awesome. Excited to sit and chat with you one-on-one.
Yes. Who needs expert guests when you have us? That's buckle up, everybody.
We are everything the B2B revenue community needs right now and more.
All right. Shall we go?
Yes, we shall. So today we are walking ourselves back through the first half of season 2, and we're going to talk about who we've already conversed with, what they had to say, what we thought of it, and what we think are some of the really good nuggets in there and takeaways for the audience. And in the show notes, we'll link back to all the episodes so people can go back and give it a second listen or maybe discover a new episode for the first time.
Yeah, I think that's what this does. It's like we're going to not have enough time to recap everything in any level of depth, but hopefully we'll spark some people to go check some out that they might have missed because they heard something we said sounded interesting. And this feels right? It's near the end of the year and feels like this is what you do near the end of the year. Let's do a little recap.
Little retrospective. Yeah. So let's start by talking about 4 of the guests, actually. Well, it's 5 because one of the episodes has 2 guests in one. And all of these guests brought topics around talent and skills, which of course are perennially interesting to anyone in revenue leadership. So we had a really great episode with David Shacklette from Skillcraft. Tim, what stands out to you about David and the conversation you had with him?
I think it's important we start with skills and talent, and then we talk about humans versus starting with AI and how it's going to replace all the humans. I think at the end of the day, we know there's things that AI is not going to replace. And the ironic part, though, is AI has made it possible now to do better assessments of the human talent. So what stood out to me is David and Skillcraft, and he came from Harvard Business Labs. They're trying to replace self-assessments with performative assessments in sales. I think it's funny because if we're going to say, are you good at sales? Do we let people just answer for themselves or do we actually make them do something? And David sort of cracked that code, I guess, to create the ACT for sales, as he called it. And it's a performance-based assessment on a business case, as opposed to, I think I'll give myself a 1 here or a 5 there. And so I love how he's sort of aspirationally wanting to replace an entire genre of assessment called self-assessments and move these complex skill clusters into a more performance-based or demonstrative sort of assessment so we can actually see people doing the skills.
Yeah, I thought that was super interesting and timely. And it reminds me of another episode that we just recently did with Chris Kingman. He's over at Nielsen IQ, and Barbara Mazziotti, who's at Cloudera. But on the episode, they were standing there as board members of Revenue Enablement Society talking about a new revenue enablement certification program, which has recently been released. Tim, what do you think about that?
Well, I think if I have sales enablement people listening to us right now, the idea of a professional certification is an interesting advance in the job. And they partnered with Dr. Leff Bonney. We'll talk about him later. This is a certification program that comes out and through Florida State University Sales Institute. So it's got some academic cred behind it as well. But I love that practitioners felt the need to build this for the practicing community. Go get, like I said, the academic credentials for it, but put together a certification program for something that in some ways has evolved to be a profession just in the last maybe decade or so. And I think in some ways, everybody does it a little differently. So I love that they put some rigor on this thing. And they're like, this is kind of what good looks like. And I think it was a big task. It took them like 5 years to do it. Partially because the Revenue Enablement Society is a group of volunteers, but it's there. And I'm excited for sales enablement professionals to find it and add this to their credentials.
Yeah, me too. That'll be linked in the show notes. And we also had Eileen Brooker, who's an enablement leader at Palo Alto Networks, talking about her approach to enablement and kind of like where it's come over the past 20 years, where she sees it going. Anything stand out to you about the conversation you had with Eileen?
Other than her hair color? I mean, it was, Well, it was purple, it was blue, it was something. Eileen is a character. And I'll be honest, I just saw on LinkedIn that she announced her retirement. So we got her. And this is everybody's chance to hear the wisdom, her wisdom for the ages by watching this episode. She just has a really good grasp of the job of enablement. And what I like about it is she recognizes the development of the human and the human's ability to articulate value, to, in other words, execute the customer experience, drive the customer experience and customer conversation, as opposed to we're just going to load them up with a bunch of product knowledge, have them swear allegiance to the best capabilities. And she just recognizes, I think, the dynamic of the seller and the customer and what it means to enable that moment. In particular, she talked about, I thought this was interesting, the first call, because there's no second call unless you do a great first call. And I hear this all the time. People are like, you know where we're getting stuck? We're not getting enough second calls. And it was prescient on her part to say, we're going to focus very intentionally on first call success and gaining the second call. And yeah, I think that's a mark of somebody who understands what it takes to help people get successful, is make sure they can get out of the gates fast and with as many opportunities as possible. So I would listen to that one, even if it isn't just for the fact that this is your big chance to hear a legacy, many, many years in enablement from someone who's done it for some really cool companies.
Definitely. And speaking of getting out of the gates fast, we also had a conversation with Michael Colonnese, who is the CEO of SV Academy, which is a really interesting learning program. Fast Company said it was like the number 2 highest quality learning program, but they train and equip SDRs and BDRs, usually who are fresh out of college, pre-train them and then hook them up with enterprise companies who need their talent. So they're hitting the ground running when they go in. Tim, what did you think of that conversation and what Michael's doing over there?
I didn't know such a thing existed. And I feel like it's an answer to a really big challenge that companies have, especially with that category or that role. It becomes a high turnover role. It needs a lot of training because a lot of people are coming there as an entry-level job, as you mentioned. What I loved about it also is it wasn't just people coming out of college, it was people shifting careers. And they had a real heart for those who are maybe in underserved communities, but they were like, hey, if you're a teacher, now you think you want to go into sales, or if you were this and you think there's a real career shift or pivot for you in sales, this is a place to get that experience and do it for companies professionally and then move into companies. And on the company side, you're like, I'm getting someone who already knows what to do. They've actually done this job. And specifically, it's just a really interesting dynamic. You got to listen to the episode to really understand the business arrangement between the company who's hiring and what SV Academy is doing to find the talent, develop the talent, sort of de-risk your hiring decisions. Because I think, again, this is a high turnover environment, the BDR, SDR, and that makes it costly and high and risky. So what if there was a company that could do that for you, doing this great thing for people who are looking for a break in this profession? So that one did my heart good on so many levels, even though it's a business. But I really like that episode, and anybody who's got that inside sales team in your organization, you should check out that episode.
So, Tim, you had a really interesting conversation with Dr. Bryan Hochstein, and he developed something called a customer health score, which is this really holistic kind of dynamic way of measuring how your solution is performing in your customer's organization and what your customer's relationship to it is, what their impression of it is. And this is not NPS, this is not CSAT, which most savvy leaders know that those are not the full picture anyway. But tell me a little bit about your conversation with Bryan.
Yeah, I like Bryan a lot. He brings that customer success angle for our revenue audience. And some people call him the doctor of customer success. I think that's pretty cool. He's a professor at Alabama, and we had a couple doctors. We'll talk more about that. But Bryan took an angle with his career and took it down the path of customer success. And what I love him talking about customer health scores is it's definitely a more multifaceted look at knowing whether your customer's at risk of churn and being able to preventatively identify potential for churn and then intervene and kind of protect that business. And it's not that he says NPS or CSAT scores are useless, but they're just not as predictive as the elements of the customer health score that he laid out for us. We were talking to him on the heels of an article he wrote for HBR. So he's published academically on this. He's published in that kind of level journal, written a book. So yeah, I mean, we have the doctor of customer success here, and it's just not revenue leaders need to pay attention to this. We all know that existing customers are the source of growth because foundationally, your back door letting customers out can't be as wide open as your front door trying to get them in. You got to keep them, and then you got to grow them. And I just love being able to have data to quantify that so that your team isn't guessing. And we're doing so much on the revenue side to analyze pipeline health. Our revenue leaders out there should be doing the same to analyze customer health and recognize that keeping and growing is as, if not more important than the wins, the new business wins. And Bryan gave us a great way to think about that as with richness of data.
I mean, customers are barraged these days from all sides. And we also spoke with Dr. Howard Dover about that. He's from UT Texas at Dallas, University of Texas at Dallas. And he talked about the crisis of commercial overwhelm and also the productivity paradox. And something about how the human in the loop is probably the most important part of the whole thing. So what's your reaction to the conversation with Howard?
I always love my conversations with Howard. He's spoken at our conferences before, and he's always good for throwing out, pulling the pin and throwing a hand grenade into the conversation so that everybody gets to think critically about what's going on. And I think he has a great eye for things like the onslaught of tech that got installed and pushed into the hands of sellers, and the fact that we wanted to improve productivity, but in fact, it sort of stunted productivity because there were just too many places to go, too many things to know, too many things to do. And he likes to talk about sellers weren't selling, they were operating machines. And that wasn't the goal. Obviously, we're all hoping that AI is going to fix some of that and the seller will get back to selling. But then in that case, he was talking about customers who are doing so much research on their own are simply overwhelmed. And so the seller can't just be, now that they're in front of the customer, they can't be just adding to the overwhelm. And that the job of being a clarifier, not a confuser, the job of helping really distill the decision to be made and facilitating that, how does a great job of explaining what really I like to say the remaining human skills are when all the AI and tech does its thing. What does the human need to do best? And to me, that's a lesson for all of us to learn as we get it sort of intoxicated with the AI and the tech, and we turn to our humans. Are we just asking them to pull the levers and push the buttons on the tech, or are we asking them and showing them how they can add value on top of that with the buyer and their experience that they have? So Howard always sees that pretty clearly, and he always does it in a provocative way.
Yeah, he's a smart guy. And then so far, midway through season 2, we've had one more doctor on the show for a total of 3 so far for everyone out there keeping track. And it is Dr. Leff Bonney. If you've been hanging around Emblaze for long, Leff Bonney. He is our research partner and the founder and director of FSU Sales Institute. We do a lot with them. He came on, Tim, to talk with you about a few studies that he's recently done, specifically around how AI is creating buyer sameness and also how sellers can differentiate themselves. And then he had some really cool insights to share on leadership fit relative to training up and coaching a sales team. So reflect on your convo with Leff for us, please.
Leff always has so much good stuff. It's so practical, but it's research-based. So even though it's research-based and it's just bathed in rigor, he brings it out in such a practical, useful way. That's what his superpower is. And I think of him like Saturday Night Live will bring back certain hosts time and time again, and they get to be, I don't know, the 5-time club or something like that. Leff comes back again and again because he's always doing something interesting.
Each time with more cowbell.
Well, yes. Thank you for keeping that metaphor alive. Saturday Night Live. So this time he came back with research around differentiation. You're going to have to listen to the whole thing if you didn't, because there's some interesting, he's got identified the 7 S's of differentiation. And again, it comes back to the human and the idea that the differentiation is executed by the human and the experience that you create. And there are these 7 S's. We talked about 3 of them. It's all we had time for. But one of them was surprise. And the idea of surprise is everybody's so used to the experience that they have with salespeople. His test had the sales customers who were in a buying simulation watch sales presentations, all 4 of them talking about essentially the same products, features, and benefits, but they were positioned as competitors. All of them gave a traditional presentation, starting with, here's the agenda, all the way through, can I take questions? And one started with the questions and said, are there any questions about why we're here today and what's trying to be accomplished? To the point where they worked their way backwards. Literally every step of the agenda was backwards, and they landed on and ended with the agenda, and they did it as a recap that said, and here's what we talked about today. And what was interesting is in the study, in essence, what they found is people thought the product was different and they thought the product was better in the condition where the person did the presentation backwards, when effectively they presented the exact same information. So surprise, differentiation. People are impacted by emotions, and you being a difference maker in the way you deliver the experience. More on that. You got to check it out. And he's trying to write a book on it. I'm trying to help him. If he's listening to this, Leff, you owe me a manuscript. Just keep it coming. And then the levers of leadership. That's really was interesting, because what he identified is so often we have sales managers that have a mixed team of people who are rookies, people who are excellent at an experience, and everything in between. And what he's been able to discover is that managers and teams that are made up of people who are similar to each other, the rookies versus the experienced excellent versus, he calls them the problem children, the ones who are struggling and they know they should be better. He was able to identify that if you put teams together of people who are in similar positions, and that manager can manage to a holistic sort of makeup or constitution of their team, move their people forward more and faster than if you're trying to manage all those different dynamics. He calls it the levers of leadership. I can't do it justice in this recap, but it is really fascinating when he talked about a company that absolutely did it that way, and they took a chance. They're like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to completely realign our sellers, and the managers are going to assume these groups. And they had results that far exceeded their previous several years of performance, and they attributed it to that move. You're going to love that because it's unique. Both of those researches, those 2 different research reports are totally unique, somewhat unexpected and counterintuitive, and those are always my favorite.
What if your next big revenue move didn't come from a blog post or a cold LinkedIn scroll, but from a real conversation with leaders who've been there?
As the world of sales is constantly evolving and constantly changing, I think it's even more critical to get together with people to understand how are they helping to solve some of the problems that our buyers have today.
Meet Emblaze, a community of sharp B2B minds, CROs, CSOs, rising stars, sharing what's actually working in sales, enablement, and customer growth.
We always find a lot of value in the partnerships that we're able to form with some of the other great organizations that are part of the team here. And personally, I love the opportunity to connect with my peer group outside of other organizations and learn from them and try to figure out if there's things that they're doing that we can pull into our organization and benefit from.
Join a monthly forum, dig into science-backed strategy, and get insight you won't find in your feed. Start your Emblaze journey today at emblazegrowth.com.
You also had a great conversation with Larry Shurtz, who is the CRO at Genesis. And he came on to talk about the evolving role of the CSO, now CRO, what that looks like, what is sort of the strategic remit of that role, and how it trickles down into the entire organization. What stands out to you about the conversation with Larry?
So Larry, over the years, he and I have connected. Before Genesis, he was a senior leader at Salesforce. He brought me on stage a few times to their sales kickoffs and helped launch our books. I've always, of course, I'm going to think he's one of the best CROs ever, but he is. He is sharp, one sharp dude. If you want to just hear from what I would think of is like the consummate CRO, you're going to want to watch that episode with Larry. Just so precise and so on target with his content. So if you're an aspiring CRO, you can hear what it looks like and how it's evolving and how one of the best in the biz is doing it. If you are a CRO, I think there's some things to learn here. Larry has always been about the big picture. This is what really stands out to me. When I had him on a webcast years ago, this was actually during COVID, when he showed up with a beard like everybody was showing up. What I loved about what he said then, and he kind of has modified it and updated it for now, is he's like, I don't think we should call it sales. I think we should call it all customer success. And in this episode, he talks about, we got to, as a CRO, move from just being hyper-focused and single-minded on pipeline and forecast, and really think of ourselves as being overseeing the entire customer experience. And so I take that to be like, that's sort of fast forward 5 years, how Larry's thinking has evolved. And as a CRO, recognizing that the entire customer experience, from pipeline to close to implementation to renewal to expansion, is really your remit. And how do you hire, train, develop, segment, staff, equip, and enable that is being the CRO's responsibility, and watching that end to end elegant. And Larry does a much more elegant job than I just did on it. So all I can say is, if understanding the CRO role as you report to one and how you can impress them, or if you want to be one, or if you are one, you got to hear it from one of the best in the business. And that is, as far as I'm concerned, Larry Shurtz, now of Genesis.
Yeah, that was episode 1 of season 2. It was a great way to open the season. And we also had a conversation with a CEO from the Congruity Group, Betsy Westhafer. And it was all about how listening to your customers, and deeply listening to your customers, is really a strategic function. And it's something that smart companies are doing to drive revenue. And there's a direct link between listening to your customers, getting the feedback that you need that really aligns to your strategic KPIs, and getting bigger, better deals, renewals, et cetera. And Tim, we had our Emblazers executive retreat in Savannah in October, which is something we do every fall. So look for that if you're a revenue leader. And the Congruity Group and Betsy were one of our partners to help us put that on. So what do you have to say about that conversation?
Yeah, Betsy recognizes that two things that I think are really important, that senior leaders need to be more purposefully engaged with their counterparts, the senior decision makers at their customers. So much of voice of customer gets delegated in a company, and you wait for some reports to come back, whether that was win-loss analysis or some voice of customer market research. And that gets filtered through a lot of things, including just when you ask a customer that and they think you have a certain expectation of what they might or might not say, it just doesn't get you the executive altitude that you're looking for. Either you can't access the right person to give you the data, or the data is filtered in some way that's not as helpful. So what I would say, Betsy's point was, senior leaders don't just show up when there are problems at a company and that's the first time they see you. And sure, you might come in and save the day, and that's awesome, but have a regular cadence. Maybe bring back the idea of advisory boards or executive councils. Have a purposeful structure to those so that you're both going to gain from it. She tells a great story on this webcast of how a customer had come to an advisory board and they were not going to renew with this company. But in the advisory board, there was discussion of the product roadmap and some of the things they were doing structurally. And that person left saying, I'm not only going to renew, I'm going to tell our company we need to do more business with you. And that might have not happened if it weren't for an executive to an executive engagement and the kind of structured conversation sharing between the customer and the provider vendor to get that kind of outcome. But there's so much other goodness that comes from it. So I think it's a discipline that lacks in companies. Senior leaders, not just in a sales pitch or in a save situation, actually having regular, ongoing, structured dialogues, listening opportunities and sharing opportunities with their customers. It's like a little old school, but it's one of those things that I think we run the risk of saying, oh, we got all these other signals. Let's watch and listen to these other signals. And we completely miss that human component. And maybe if there was any theme in this first half of this second season to all of these, it was, what's that remaining human component that distinctly only the human seller and human buyer, the human leaders on both sides can do? And here's some ways to do them better. Here's some ways to do them different. And here's some ways to add value to the customer in ways that bring value to you as the company. Yay, it's a little trite to say human in the loop, but maybe that's how I would summarize the season thus far.
Mm-hmm. You took the words right out of my mouth. It's been a really strong first half of season 2. Do you think we should keep going after the winter break?
Yeah, I think, well, we have some other people booked who I think are going to be interesting. We will bring some people in who are experts at implementing AI and have some stories and some proof points to share. We owe that to you. So we get it. So we're excited about a couple guests in that area. But we're going to bring a lot of practitioners to the table in this second half, folks just like you who have some really interesting success stories to talk about. And so I think it's going to be a strong second half to season 2.
I do too. Thank you so much for being with us for this recap episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Emblazers show wherever you're listening or watching. And check us out at emblazgrowth.com. We'll see you soon.